All right, guys, welcome back to part 3, the examples. So let's shift down and take a look at some examples specific for you. So given the function f of theta equals 7 times the cosine of theta, what is the amplitude? And sketch this graph. So the amplitude, again, is that number right in front of the word cosine. So my amplitude is 7. If I want to sketch this graph, I would typically start at 1 on the x-axis for a cosine graph, but my amplitude is 7. So I'm going to go all the way up to 7, which means I'm going to go all the way down to negative 7. I have no other changes. So one full rotation, or the period of the graph, is going to be 2 pi. And I know it's going to start where it ends, and halfway in between is going to be where its lowest point is. So I'm going to start up at 0, 7. My lowest point is going to be pi negative 7. And I'm going to end up at 2 pi 7. So I have to find out the quadrants. So halfway between 0 and pi is pi over 2. And so that's going to come down at 3.5. And halfway between pi and 2 pi, or sorry, that's going to be where it crosses. Halfway between pi and 2 pi is going to be 3 pi over 2. And that's also going to where it crosses on the way back up. So again, it is a curve. It is not a V. So that is my cosine curve with an amplitude of 7. Second one, based on this function, what is the midline? And then sketch a graph. My midline is what is after the parentheses, that negative 4. A line is an equation, so a horizontal line means my midline is going to be at x equals negative 4. So when I'm sketching my graph, again, I have a cosine curve with an amplitude of 3. I have no horizontal shift, so I'm going to start right on this y-axis. I have no change in period, so it's going to end at 2 pi. But my midline, instead of being the x-axis, is going to shift down. So I got to remember now to change my altitude, because my altitude is based off of this midline. So if my midline, I'll put it in this funky color, is at negative 4. Essentially, that's my new x-axis. That's what I'm going to be basing all my curves and amplitude off of. So my amplitude from the midline at negative 4 is going to go up 3, because my amplitude is 3, to negative 1, and down 3 to negative 7. My key points, again, are still going to be pi, and then the intervals in between, 3 pi over 2 and pi over 2. So halfway between, it's going to bottom out, pi negative 7, and it's going to cross my midline at pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. And it's going to end at 2 pi negative 1. So this is my cosine curve with an amplitude of 3. The distance between the midline and the top and the bottom. And a midline that has shifted the whole curve down 4. So here we're asked to write a formula based on the information given. So if the midline starts on the point 0, 3, my midline is going to be x equals 3. My amplitude is 2. My period is 4. So I need to find a b value. And that is 2 pi divided by the period. In this case is 4, so that's going to be pi over 2. So now I can write my equation. Y equals the amplitude of sine times the b value, pi over 2. I have no horizontal shift, times x. So I don't have anything to factor out. And my midline is up 3. So that would be the formula that takes into account all of these situations. So I also want to be able to look at a graph and write a formula from a graph. So I'm looking for the key parts that I need to write the formula. So I see it's off the x-axis, so it's got a new midline. So if its lowest point is -5 and highest point is -1, halfway in between is my midline. So that's going to be -3. Based on that midline, I can see my amplitude is 2. The distance between the midline and the highest point, and the midline and the lowest point. I'm going to start with the sine curve right here. So I'm going to do a sine function because I know starting on the y-axis, it's going to have no horizontal shift. So if it starts at 0 and ends at 4, that means my period is 4. So to find my b value, I have to do 2 pi divided by my period and simplify. So I can write an equation, y equals 2, my amplitude. I'm using the sine curve with a b value of pi over 2, x, because I have no horizontal shift, and my midline's gone down 3. So I'm going to look at this exact same graph again and just show you what else the other options are. My midline's never going to change for sine or cosine. So it's still going to be x equals -3. But this time I'm going to look at a cosine curve because maybe visually that's what you see is this cosine curve. Still going to have an amplitude of 2. But instead of starting on the y-axis, it's shifted 3 places to the left. So I'm going to have an h value of -3. The period is still 4, as it starts at -3 and ends at 1. So this period is still 4. So my b value is still going to be pi over 2. So instead of writing a sine equation, this time I'm going to write a cosine equation. Amplitude is 2. I'm going to have a cosine. My b value is pi over 2. And this time I have an h value of -3, so x minus -3 becomes x plus 3. And my midline, clean that parenthesis up for you. Is at -3. So a different equation for the exact same graph. So in this, I looked at the sine graph and created a sine equation. And with the exact same graph, I looked at the cosine and did the cosine equation. Notice the only difference was the horizontal shift. Let's take another look at another example. Again, we could do sine or cosine. I am going to do the sine because it starts on the y-axis, so I know I don't have to deal with a horizontal shift. So I'm going to look the full rotation that starts and ends there. The first thing I notice is that it's upside down. So I'm going to have a negative a value. Then I notice that my midline has shifted. So instead of being on the x-axis, my midline right there has gone down 1. So my k value, my midline, is going to be -1. My amplitude is still 1. I'm still going a maximum of 1 away. I don't have a horizontal shift because I'm starting right on the y-axis. And my period, it starts at 0 and ends at 3. So to find my b value, I do 2 pi divided by the period, and I cannot simplify that. So my equation would be y equals negative sine of 2 pi over 3x, because I have no horizontal shift, minus 1 because I vertically shifted down. So switching it up, given the equation, find the amplitude, period, horizontal shift, and midline. So I'm looking for my a value, my h value, my k value, and my period. Amplitude is the number in front of your sine or cosine. So amplitude is 4. My h value is the number there. If it's subtraction, it's going to be positive. So my horizontal shift is 3, and it's going to the right. I always want to indicate a direction. My k value is what is outside the parentheses. So that is 7. And again, I want to indicate a direction. It is going up. And to find my period, I have to use this mini formula 2 pi over b, where my b value is outside the parentheses. So 2 pi divided by pi over 2. So I multiply by the reciprocal. 2 pi times 2 over pi. Pi's will cancel out. 2 times 2 is 4. So I've identified all the parts of the formula. And one more time. Here's the part we need to remember. I need to make sure that I'm factored out to find my horizontal shift. So I'm going to rewrite the equation. Take out the greatest common factor, which is 5, which will leave me with x plus 4 minus 2. So my amplitude, the number in front of sine, is 5. My horizontal shift is going to be negative 4, or 4 to the left. Because remember, our base is always subtraction. My k value is going to be 2 down because of this negative 2 at the end here. And then to find my period, I'm going to do 2 pi over 5 because this is my b value. I can't simplify that anymore. So that is my period. So hopefully that will get you off to a good start. You'll have 6 problems to work on as the only submission for the week. And we'll continue with this going on next week. Hope you guys are all doing well, staying safe, and talk to you soon.